boy receives a mystery gift that is him invisible and his life changes. Now, brother. So what? Wait, what just happened to my thing? Let me fix that. So what? Yeah. We're just reacting to this. We're reacting to this. We're reacting to this second little video. So yeah, make sure you like and subscribe and put that okay? Like, and hit that notification bell right there. Make sure you subscribe to SUBSRIBE. So let's get into it. Apparently this guy's face is invisible. Oh, it is. Oh! It's broken.
A boy named Michelle leaves home and rides. A boy named Michelle leaves home and rides his bike to a costume shop where he hopes to buy a Spider-Man costume for Halloween. After admiring the costume for a while, he knocks on the door so that the owner can let him in, but the man says he's not open yet. Michelle doesn't get this, and he keeps trying to get the man to open the door, but he insists that the shop is still closed. Michelle eventually walks away from there, but as someone bumps into him, he nearly loses his money. After he saves it from flying away, Michelle enters his bike and heads to school. When he gets there, he parks his bike and hides his money inside his shoe before heading inside. While he's in class, Michelle secretly records a video of his crush, Stella, but he eventually stops just as someone sees him. As his teacher also sees him with his phone, she seizes it and asks if he wants to repeat 9th grade like a bully named Ivan.
Vuoi rifare la terza come Casadio?
Michelle doesn't say anything, but Ivan finds it funny and makes a joke with his friend, Brando. Almost immediately, the school principal enters the classroom and tells the students that a police inspector, Giovanna, wants to speak to them. Giovanna then greets the students and
Giovanni?
asks if they know the whereabouts of a classmate named Martino. Ivan and Brando make another joke, but Giovanna ignores them and mentions that if anyone sees or hears from Martino, they need to contact the police immediately.
Ditegli di tornare a casa.
After she's done talking, one of her officers gives her something, and she suddenly stares at Michelle, who looks worried. Just then, Giovanna walks up to his table and tells him that he forgot his lunch. Michelle looks ashamed, but he collects his food and thanks her while calling her his mom. After she walks away, Ivan and Brando make fun of Michelle for having his mom bring his lunch to him at school. Michelle doesn't respond to them, but he notices that he's now bleeding through his nose. Michelle immediately leaves the classroom to clean his nose and wash his hands in the restroom. As he's about to leave, he hears the school bell ringing and quickly hides inside one of the toilets while looking scared. After a while, Ivan and Brando find him and break a part of the door before dragging him out. They then ask for his money, and even though Michelle claims he has none, they eventually check his shoe and find the costume money. Michelle is not happy about this, but he can't complain because he's scared of the bullies, who give him a head start to run away before Ivan starts shooting him with a paintball gun.
Sempre meglio che avercelo in galera. Scemo.
As Michelle runs away, he initially avoids getting caught by Ivan, but he is quite unlucky and he gets shot eventually. He falls down in the middle of some kids at the school, and the bullies make fun of him as they walk past him. Much later, Michelle heads home, and his sister, Candela, looks excited to see him. Michelle doesn't want to be bothered, and he heads to the kitchen to greet the cook.
Chi le ha fatte?
She then informs him that there's food for him, but as he learns that his mom cooked it, he says he's not interested. As Michelle gets to his room, he turns on his computer and starts stalking Stella's social media page while also contemplating whether to send her a friend request or not. Meanwhile, Candela keeps disturbing Michelle and asking how it's possible that Superman's identity remains unknown, even though he only wears a pair of glasses as his disguise. Michelle doesn't seem bothered by this, and after he sends a friend request to Stella, he checks his small box to see if he has any money left. Unfortunately,
Candela, per favore.
There's only a small note there, but Michelle still looks desperate to buy a costume so he can attend Stella's Halloween party later that day. He eventually leaves the house and heads to a local shop to buy a cheap costume. As he gets there, he's shown an old Chinese superhero costume, and even though he doesn't like it, the shop owner convinces him that it's really nice. Michelle then asks what the superhero's powers are,
Che potere avrebbe?
but the shop owner says he'll find out by himself. Elsewhere, Giovanna receives a video of Martino telling his parents that he only went away because he's fed up with being at home. Giovanna doesn't understand why he would do that, and she also feels it's strange because he's a really intelligent boy. Later that night, she arrives home and sees Michelle looking dejected while wearing his Halloween costume. Giovanna asks why he hasn't gone to Stella's party, and he says he doesn't like his costume because he doesn't even know who the superhero is.
Non ci vado, faccio schifo.
Giovanna doesn't think it's so bad, and she says the superhero might be a really good person who fights crime well. Michelle asks if it's like his dad, and Giovanna says he also fought bad guys. However, she adds that he was just a cop like her before his death. As Michelle still thinks about whether to go to the party, Giovanna encourages him.
Dai, vai alla festa che sennò Stella ci rimane male.
And he eventually leaves. Shortly after, he arrives at the party and Stella looks happy to see him. As she talks about her costume, Brando sees Michelle and asks what he's wearing. He says it's a Chinese superhero costume, and Stella says it's nice. She also mentions that she has been to China before. Michelle then asks how long she'll be staying in town, and she says she hopes to stay for a long time because she likes the fact that it's close to the sea.
Oh my god.
Stay for a long time because she likes the fact that it's close to the sea. Michelle likes this.
E qui quanto resti?
But as they keep talking, they suddenly see some of the guests gathering around the TV. As they go closer, Stella sees a recording of herself playing on the TV. Brando then mentions that he got the videos from Michelle's phone after it was seized by the teacher earlier that day. As Stella looks at him, Michelle looks embarrassed and runs away to the bathroom. He then laments about how things are turning out for him. As he also complains about his costume and says he doesn't know what it can do, he makes a wish to be invisible, and lightning suddenly strikes in the area.
Fammi sparire, fammi diventare invisibile!
Michelle eventually jumps out of the window and heads home looking disappointed. The next morning, Michelle wakes up and sees his dog looking at him weirdly. He ignores it and heads to the bathroom to take his bath. While brushing his teeth and looking at the mirror, he suddenly notices that he's now invisible. Michelle looks shocked and doesn't know what to do. As his mom enters the room, she doesn't see anyone there, and she wonders where Michelle is. She eventually looks around and only sees the dog, but Michelle quickly writes a note saying he has already left for school.
E adesso?
After Giovanna leaves the house, Michelle wraps himself up with some clothes and heads to school. However, as he's about to head inside, he rethinks his decision and calls himself a monster because he thinks it's weird that he's invisible. Before he heads back home, he sees Yvonne packing his paintball gun inside his bag, and this gives Michelle an idea.
Sono un mostro.
He then enters the classroom and takes out the paintball gun from Yvonne's bag. After he shoots it on the board near the teacher, Michelle drops the paintball gun on Ivan. Everyone thinks he did it, and the teacher scolds him. Meanwhile, Michelle sneaks into the teacher's office and finds his test sheet to write the correct answers so he can get a good grade. He then goes to disturb Brando while he's playing tennis. Unfortunately, Brando loses his match, and his dad scolds him for it. As he's then in the locker room, Michelle pranks him by getting him really scared after he moves a tennis ball. After Michelle eventually leaves the school looking fulfilled, he sees some girls heading into the building. Michelle realizes that they're going into the changing room, so he follows them. When he enters, someone tries to throw a towel on the bench, but it lands on him. As the girls see that there's someone under the towel, they look really shocked. Unfortunately, Michelle's powers start wearing off, and he turns visible again. He looks embarrassed by this, and as the girls take off the towel, they see him and scream loudly. Michelle gets reported to the principal, and Giovanna comes over to take him home. While in the car, Giovanna says she doesn't understand why he went into the girls' changing room.
Alle ragazze piace andare per gradi.
She also mentions that he nearly got expelled, but Michelle doesn't say anything. The next day at school, a psychologist working with the police named Basili comes to the school to announce that Brando is now missing. As he advises the students to always communicate their emotions instead of running away, everyone keeps looking at Michelle and making fun of him for what happened the previous day. Suddenly, Michelle notices that he's starting to turn invisible again, so he covers his arms and waits for the school bell to ring before running out of the class. As he gets home, he meets Candela in his room.
Non è vero.
And he quickly turns to face the wall while telling her to leave. Candela doesn't get why he's sending her out of his room, but she pretends to leave by opening the door and closing it again. As he then takes off his clothes, Candela sees that he's invisible and she screams loudly. Michelle quickly covers her mouth and tells her not to scream.
Ti prego, non dire niente, ti spiego tutto.
Candela agrees not to do this, and Michelle then explains how he likely got his powers from the superhero costume. Candela thinks it looks like magical pajamas that can make people invisible for a long time. Michelle still seems bothered by his new powers,
Un pigiama magico?
but Candela says he's now a superhero and that he can save people from danger. Michelle says there's no one to save, but Candela mentions that he should call himself the Invisible Boy. The next day, Basili tells Giovanna and the other cops at the police department that he doesn't think there's anything suspicious about the disappearances of Brando and Martino. He adds that the kids likely just left home because they were overwhelmed by the pressure they were facing at home. Giovanna still thinks there might be something more to it, but Basili mentions that from the messages sent by the boys to their families, it's quite clear that they've not been kidnapped.
Va bene, allora perché lei è stato mandato qui?
Much later, Giovanna arrives home while Michelle is reading a comic book about superheroes. As she's about to enter his room, he quickly takes off his clothes and Giovanna thinks he's not around. When she gets to her room, she calls someone and laments about how Michelle has been behaving. She also says she thinks he might have found out that he's adopted. Michelle is shocked by this, but he doesn't say anything. He then heads out to the beach and plays with the swing while thinking about what Giovanna said. Coincidentally, Stella also shows up at the beach and sees the swing moving without anyone sitting on it. As she realizes that there's likely someone there, Stella walks closer and asks who it is and if they're a ghost or an angel.
O sei solo il vento?
Michelle then draws a smiley face on the floor, and Stella asks if it's what he looks like. He doesn't say anything, but she still tells him to swing with her. Michelle does just this, and when Stella eventually stops, she asks if he can be her friend. Michelle says he doesn't mind, and Stella offers him a bar of candy. Michelle looks shocked and asks if she's not even scared of him, but she says she's not. Shortly after, Stella realizes that she has to leave for her training, so she asks the invisible person if she'll see him again. He says she will, and she then leaves. Michelle looks happy about this, but as he looks around, he sees a strange blind guy seemingly watching him. This leaves him confused because he's still invisible, but the man eventually walks away. The next day at school, Michelle says sorry to Stella for what happened the other day, but she says it's not a problem. He then sees her draw a smiley face on her book, and this makes him happy. Later that night, he sneaks over to her house, and she lets him in after he draws a smiley face on the window. As she then asks him several questions about himself,
Mi hai fatto paura.
Michelle notices that he's starting to turn visible, so he leaves abruptly. When he gets home, Candela encourages Michelle to tell Stella the truth, and he decides to follow her advice. Meanwhile, Stella and her mom are now at the gym for her gymnastics training. Stella seems really distracted, and she misses her steps a few times. Her mom doesn't look happy about this, and she eventually leaves to get a cup of coffee. While Stella continues her training alone, someone shows up inside the gym and shoots her with a sedative. As she passes out, the masked man carries her out of the building, and Michelle sees this just as he arrives. Michelle tries to stop the man from leaving with her, but there's not much he can do. After he eventually leaves, Michelle calls the police, and they arrive at the scene in no time. Michelle then tells Giovanna that he feels bad because he couldn't save Stella. However, Giovanna tells him not to worry because she'll be found eventually. Elsewhere, Stella is already at a lab where some tests are being carried out on her. After the results are revealed,
Voglio tornare a casa.
The scientists call their commander to inform him that she's not the one they're looking for. The guards at the place then take her to a bunker where she sees Brando and Martino. The next day, Michelle notices that his costume is missing, but he eventually realizes that Giovanna washed it. Unfortunately, it's also now smaller, and even though Candela wears it, she doesn't turn invisible. Michelle then goes to angrily confront Giovanna for ruining his costume. Giovanna says she washed it because it was dirty, but Michelle doesn't seem to care. He also says he hates her, and this surprises Giovanna. As the cook tells Michelle not to speak to his mom like that, he says that Giovanna is not his mother. Giovanna is shocked to hear this, but before she says anything, Michelle leaves, and his powers appear to shatter a glass behind her. While he's then on the beach to clear his mind, the strange man from the other day approaches him and says that his costume has nothing to do with his powers.
Non ho rapito io la tua amica.
Michelle looks shocked and wonders if he was the one who kidnapped Stella, but he says he's not the one. Michelle realizes that he read his mind, and he asks how he's able to do it. The man then introduces himself as Andrej and says that he's Michelle's father. Michelle says his father is dead, but Andrej says it's what he has been told. As he looks confused, Andrej tells him a story of how nuclear radiation gave people powers in Russia many years ago. He was one of those people who were called specials, and they were all taken for experiments so they could be used as weapons against other countries. In the camp, Andrej met Michelle's mother, Yelena, and they got attracted to each other. After they eventually gave birth to Michelle, they realized that their baby would be experimented on like them, so they fled the camp. The soldiers immediately go after them, so Yelena tells Andrej to run away while she buys him enough time to leave. After Andrej quickly escapes, Yelena turns invisible and starts trying to fight the soldiers. Unfortunately, the commander discovers where she is, and he shoots her down. Andrej then mentions how he took Michelle to many places until he found a suitable home for him with Giovanna. Michelle realizes that he got his mother's powers, but he still has doubts about Andrej's story. He also asks if Andrej can just randomly read people's minds, and he says he can. As they stand near a fisherman, he says that the man is already contemplating whether to call the police because he thinks Andrej is going to kidnap Michelle.
Non posso smettere.
Elsewhere, Giovanna looks worried that Michelle still hasn't returned home. As Basili sees her, he asks what's going on, and she says she's worried that Michelle is changing. She adds that he just told her that she's not his mother, and she thinks he already knows certain things about her. Before she says anything else, a detective informs her and Basili that someone has just called about a strange man walking around with a boy.
Una chiamata.
They then immediately leave the office and head to the scene. Before they arrive, Michelle asks Andrej how he'll be able to control his powers, and he says it will come to him naturally. He then wipes the fisherman's memory, and Michelle looks shocked. Andrej also gives Michelle a suit that can help him turn invisible without having to take off his clothes. As the cops arrive, Andrej says he needs to leave, but that he'll always be in touch with Michelle because their minds are connected. He adds that Michelle needs to be careful because the bad guys who started the Russian experiment already know about him, and they'll be trying to find him.
Le nostre menti sono in contatto.
After he leaves, the cops question the fisherman, but he can't remember anything. As Giovanna asks if Michelle saw anything, he says he didn't, so she tells him to go home. Basili offers to take him home, and Michelle follows him.
Lo accompagno io se vuoi.
As they get there, Michelle heads to his room to try out the new costume. After wearing it, he quickly hides it when Basili comes into the room to call him to come downstairs to have something to eat. As they both sit at the table, Basili talks about how Michelle might be going through some changes due to his age. Michelle doesn't understand what he's talking about, but as he sees bloodstains on Basili's shirt, he realizes that he's a bad person. Michelle quickly tries to escape, but Basili says he has already locked the door. He adds that if Michelle calls the police, his friends will die.
Ho chiuso a chiave.
Luckily, Michelle is able to run away from Basili, and he even uses his powers to turn invisible. Basili looks impressed and says he's just like his mother. Michelle doesn't seem to care, and he keeps running around, but Basili finds a way to trap him inside his room. As he then talks about how his team can help Michelle achieve more with his powers, Michelle traps him with his secret bed and runs away. When he gets outside, he sees Ivan on his bike and stops him so they can leave together. Ivan is shocked shocked because he's talking to an invisible person, but Michelle still insists that they need to leave, so he rides his bike away from the scene.
Silenzi.
Much later, Giovanna arrives home and sees the place scattered. As she wonders what happened, Andrzej knocks on her door and she goes to meet him. Meanwhile, Stella discovers that there's a way she can leave the bunker and possibly send out a call for help. After Brando and Martino help her up, she eventually leaves the bunker and sneakily moves around to find her way to the searchlight. Elsewhere, Ivan stops his bike and Michelle reveals his identity to the bully. Ivan is shocked by this, but Michelle mentions that their friends are in danger.
Niente lascia perdere.
He adds that Basili is among the bad guys, and Ivan says he has always known that something was off about the psychologist because he has seen many of them in the past. Michelle asks why he has seen many psychologists, and Ivan says he has ADHD. After a while, they start wondering how to find their missing friends.
E anche Brando.
And coincidentally, Stella gets to the searchlight and paints a smiley face on it. As she directs it to the sky, Michelle sees this and realizes that Stella is trying to send a message to him. They then trace the light and find out that their friends are being held on a ship. Someone eventually catches Stella and forces her to turn off the light. Ivan and Michelle realize that Stella has likely been caught, so they look worried. As Michelle turns invisible and plans to go inside the ship, Ivan shoots its power unit to trigger an alarm that distracts the guards. After Michelle enters, he sees a control room where Basili and some other man are watching video footage from inside Giovanna's car. In the video, Andrei commends her for being a good mom to Michelle, and she also says he means so much to her. They both then look worried because they know that Michelle is likely in danger. Suddenly, Michelle mistakenly hits something inside the room, and Basili and his men hear this. They don't see anyone around. And as they leave the room, Michelle follows them. As he tries to open one of the cages inside the ship, someone opens it from the other side, and Michelle sees Stella being transferred to a different cage. After she's locked inside, Michelle attacks the guards and forces them to release Stella and the other kids. He then tells the guards to enter the cage so he can lock them inside. As Stella and the others look happy to be free, Michelle takes off his mask and reveals his identity to them. Stella is shocked by this, and she says she didn't know he was the one she had been talking to. Michelle says he is. But before they continue talking, Brando and Martino remind them that they need to leave. Before they do so, Stella says they can't leave because there's a man they need to save on the other side of the ship. Michelle says he can go alone.
Portali tu fuori.
But Stella suggests following him since she knows where the man is. Following this, Brando and Martino start finding their way out while Stella takes Michelle to see the man she talked about. As they eventually see him, Stella turns on Michelle and points a gun at him. This leaves him shocked, and as he asks if she's one of them, she says she's not Stella. Michelle doesn't understand what's going on, but the man they came to see suddenly touches her, and she passes out. He then says his name is Claw, and that he can get people to do what he wants by touching them. He also talks about Michelle's potential and says they're alike, but Michelle turns invisible and fights the guards while trying to escape. Before he can do that, Claw says he can't escape, and he also threatens to kill Stella if he tries anything silly again. He adds that he lost Michelle back at his house, and he won't let it happen again. Michelle says he was never at his house, but
L'avete uccisa, siete stati voi.
Claw says he was there as Basili. He adds that he touched Basili and Stella to make them do his bidding. Michelle still doesn't want to be part of whatever Claw is planning, and he says his mind. However, Claw tells his men to release their submarine out of the ship so they can leave. He then tells Michelle that it's time for them to leave because his mom is waiting for them. Michelle says that Yelena is dead, but Claw says she didn't die. She adds that she's now one of them, and she's even the one who instructed him to bring Michelle back to her. Elsewhere, Giovanna and Andrzej find Ivan, and he leads them to the ship. As Giovanna is about to enter, Andrzej senses that Michelle is not inside. He also notices that a bomb is inside the ship, and it will go off soon. Before Giovanna turns back, she sees Martino and Brando calling for help, so she saves them. As she also enters the ship, she finds a cage and opens it, only to find Basili. He looks quite innocent and thanks her for saving him, but she looks looks angry and asks for her son. Vasily says he doesn't know what she's talking about, but Giovanna doesn't believe him. Andrej then comes in and says that Vasily isn't lying. He adds that they need to leave the ship because the bomb is about to go off. Just as they leave, the ship explodes, and Giovanna looks worried for Michelle. Back on the submarine, Claw says that Stella will be sent back to her people in a safety capsule. He adds that Michelle is not a regular person, and he's much more important than he thinks. He also mentions that specials are not like humans who waste their lives away. As Stella is taken into the capsule, Claw says it's for the best because Michelle will now be part of a proper family that doesn't involve normal people. Michelle doesn't look happy about this, and as he gets really angry, he starts breaking things inside the submarine. Claw is shocked by what's happening, but Michelle still causes an explosion and enters the safety capsule. As Claw says that Yelena would be disappointed in him,
Tua madre sarà molto delusa.
Michelle says his mom is dead. He then closes the door, and the safety capsule takes him and Stella back to the surface. When they get back on land, everyone looks happy to see them, and they also admire Michelle's powers. As he sneezes, Giovanna quickly gives him a blanket and looks relieved to see that he's alive. Just then, he sees Andrej entering a building and tells Giovanna to excuse him. As he goes to meet his father, Michelle says he doesn't want him to leave, but he says he has to. He adds that they'll always be connected, and he'll know when his son needs him. Michelle then asks why Stella was kidnapped when he was the one they were looking for. Andrej says it doesn't matter anymore, and that the important thing is that no one will remember what happened. As he sees Stella walking outside the room, Michelle goes outside to meet her, and she says she has been looking for him. She then mentions that she's happy about the memorable moments they've shared over the past few days. Michelle says the same, but he adds that she'll soon forget him.
Tu vai dagli altri. Io ti raggiungo.
Stella doesn't get this, but Michelle just tells her to meet with the others. As she leaves, Andrej uses his powers to wipe the memories of everyone who knows what happened. The next day, the police commissioner asks Vasily and Giovanna how the kids were saved, but they don't seem to remember anything. The commissioner then tells Giovanna to take credit for it because she was the one who brought the kids back. Following this, she heads out of the office and meets the media to take credit for finding the missing kids. Much later at school, Ivan and Brando try to bully Michelle, but he says he won't even argue with them. He then mentions that he already knows that Ivan isn't a bad person, and he just has an attention disorder. He also tells Brando that if he's looking to take out his anger on someone, he can do that on his dad, who he's always angry with. The bullies are shocked to hear this, and they leave him alone. As he heads out, he sees Stella and asks if she's not staying at the school party. Stella says she doesn't want to celebrate being kidnapped, and she's leaving already. As she's about to walk away, Stella asks if he would like to walk with her.
Sei sempre raffreddato tu,
And Michelle agrees to follow her. Elsewhere, a soldier reports to his boss that the mission failed and Michelle escaped from them. His boss happens to have invisibility powers, and she sneaks up on him. As she hurts him, he says there's still some good news because Michelle's twin sister Natasha has been found in Morocco. The commander looks happy about this, and it turns out that she's Yelena. Surprisingly, it also turns out that Yelena gave birth to twins, and Andrej escaped with both of them while she stayed back to fight the soldiers. Even though he started off as someone who didn't want his powers, Michelle eventually saved the day by accepting his responsibility. He also got to meet his father and learn about his mother, who he still doesn't believe is alive. There now appear to be more revelations awaiting Michelle in the future, especially with the possibility of his sister coming into the mix. But would you rather have invisibility powers or the ability to read minds?
Yeah, no. That sounds sick. Well, guys, that was a good video. Pretty cool. Good a lot of stuff. And yeah, we're gonna end it right here. But make sure you like and subscribe. Turn on that notification bell. And we'll see y'all later.